Well, good afternoon and welcome to Futuna Chapel. And today we are live streaming this event for the very first time in our history. So I would also like to welcome those people who are watching online. And as I have access to the data, I know that we are being watched by somebody in Australia as well as here in New Zealand. And here you are in person. So tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to Futuna Chapel. My name is Nick Bevan. I am the chair of the trust that has the privilege of looking after this chapel. And it's wonderful to be able to be part of Wellington Heritage Week and have the chapel open for people to visit and to enable presentations such as the one that you're about to see happen. We also have a program tomorrow of a tour in the morning, and we have presentations by Carolina Ezo and Alistair Katanak related to the restoration of heritage. So thank you for coming along, and thank you to those who have helped us bring this event together and to have it online. And it's now my pleasure to introduce to you Professor Marc Aurel Schnabel from the university. He's the Dean of the Wellington Faculty of Architecture and Design Innovation. And the story that you're about to hear starts with him.
Thank you, Nick, for the introduction. Tēnā koto, tēnā koto, tēnā koto katoa. The story started with me coming here for the first time to the chapel and realized the quality and the amazing architecture and feeling which this building has. And then in that context, I realized the heritage is something which you have to experience, which you want to be, which you feel and taste and see and touch and be in. But on the other hand, how can we give access to places like that in a different realm to people who are not here now in Karori or in Wellington, cannot reach it? And how can we engage in a different way what heritage means in the first place? Heritage means for each of us individually something very different. We treasure certain things, we go to museums, to galleries and so on, but how can we translate heritage in a digital realm? And that becomes a very interesting topic because it has something to do with authenticity, with the real matter versus the virtual. And in that context, we can think about where is the value and how does value is generated and given. So here, the introduction slide to our talk, Virtual Futuna. I will present that with my colleagues Michael Weir, who will be joining us virtual, with Katie Scheid and Baron Mallet. I will first talk a little bit more about the unmediated heritage and give a little bit of context before we come talking about the building and what we did in our research. And at the end, we will have real hands-on try where you all can explore the chapel in a virtual context, if you wish. I always put that up saying digital technologies, digital media are not only a tool, but it's a different way of how we think about design, how we think about heritage, how we think about engaging with different realms. One can see that very quickly only as an instrument, but if you go further than that, it becomes something very different. The engagement and what the output is very different. I also talk about in the digital realm that a change is everywhere, change is always happening. With a digital instrument, you always, especially in design processes, it appears that you can do changes very quickly, very easily, and never is actually the real thing there. A file can be changed all the time, but where do you come to the point that you say, that is now the artifact? In a built environment, you have a building and you could say that is now finished, even if over time there's changes, but that is a very different concept in terms of that. Degas, a French philosopher, stated the philosophy around dualism, where he says there is a body and the mind, and there's a dualism between what I think in my mind and what my body can do. So I can think, I'm on a diet, I don't eat, but after some time your body will say, I'm very hungry, and you will be eating. So there is this interesting conflict, giving and taking, and that's, you could see how is that with our mind, our physical being, and what we produce in a digital environment. Now, digital environments have a whole spectrum, and you see here the realm in which we all engage in that. On one hand is reality, the real thing. On the other side is the pure virtual environment, and there are stages in between. And we all have engage in a virtual environment. Our thinking, our dreams are virtual, are not real. Now here, being here is the virtual, and there is a mediated, for example, for everybody who watches us online. If you look at this concept of the Tower of Babel, the story in the Bible, where people wanted to build a tower to reach heaven, to reach God, that is actually a very interesting concept, saying we don't know how we can get up there, we don't know how to build it, we don't even know God is there, we assume it's there, let's build a tower and get up there. And while they built it, they realized, okay, we have to do another layer, and they tried to build higher and higher. Well, they never reached heaven, but they reached the sky. And that is an interesting concept of how you have a problem, you generate a problem, how you frame it, how you do it, and how you reflect on it. And that thinking I want to bring into a little bit is about, for example, the Sydney Opera House. The Sydney Opera House, and probably also here the Futuna Chapel, is a building which you not can represent in plan, section, elevation. You can only really experience it in a three-dimensional environment and really seeing it three-dimensional. And this building where you're now in here, it is really something different if you just look at it as a photo. Similar, there is a building, it's called the Blur building. It is a cloud. And it's also an interesting concept because a cloud cannot be presented in plan, section, elevation, but the term generates something in your mind and you automatically know what a cloud is. I don't need to give you a picture of plan, section, elevation. At the same time, you can't experience the building from the inside because in a cloud it is just fog. A very interesting concept. Now, I talk quickly about two other projects just to frame our research where we sit in, and you all know the Gordon-Wilson flat, and there is a big discussion around keep them, keep not them, and so on. But what we did 2 years ago, and we worked on an exhibition in the Wellington Museum where we captured the Gordon-Wilson flat. Here there is the building shed. We generated a virtual exhibition where you go through, you experience here the plans, the building, and you can go into the Gordon-Wilson flat and see what are actually the flats, how they are in the where they're designed, and what is the state of the art now when you would go there in that context now, how do they look at? And then we generate a virtual file where you can go through it and experience the Gordon-Wilson flat from in a one-to-one scale, more or less. You can fly around it. Here you see the virtual model, and then you can go into the apartments and can explore that. So that is, for example, here, that thing, it is a virtual VR experience. Again, the medium, what you now see, is not really the same thing because you're not really immersed in it. But what we did here was the flipping between the architect's model, the pristine model, the idea of what is this building versus the photogrammetry, the model, what is it now, in what state it is. And in this context, you can flip and can blend your experience between the decay of the real building versus an ideal plan from the architect, and how they can overlap. We put that all in an exhibition context with different aspects, different medias, so for people to understand and explore what is the building, what is the heritage around it, and by that be able to contribute to their experience and to the discussion about the heritage and the value of the Gordon Wilson flats. A second study is about Wellington's timber churches, and it goes a little bit off at the topic, but we are still here also in a church. Wellington had a lot of timber churches. Many of them taken down or burned down over the time, and all what is left are some old pictures or some description around it. So what we did, based on these photos, we developed models and understood what is actually the language of this building, what is the architectural genes of these buildings, and were able to regenerate them, and found out that which buildings are designed by which architect, and could in that context also date certain churches who actually built them, and generate lost information about these churches. And that became a whole selection and study of churches and in the larger Wellington region. And the last project which I show you is a bit further away, is in Kashgar. Kashgar is the most western city on the Silk Road in China, a very old city, and it's also falls apart and is partly taken down and replaced with modern buildings. So we went there and took drone footage and images, and we tried to capture the feeling of the old city, but again, not as a complete model, but as something which is broken, to understand this is what the city is at the moment, and you can go into that model and you can navigate and you can rebuild the model and can leave your own mark. The same thing as a city always develops further, and you can develop your own part in this context. Now, before I wrap up and hand then to Michael, what I want to talk about is the intangible values. If we go into a church, if we go into here the Futuna Chapel, we very quickly realized it is not only the building and the material and the proportion, but we can realize very quickly that there is another value, an intangible value. In a sacred building or church, we can feel there is more to it. There is something where we go and worship, or where we do certain rituals. Now, how can we translate these in a virtual context? So if you now go into virtual reality, where would you do certain rituals? And certain elements are for certain religions very crucial. So for example, in the Muslim faith, that you wash your hands and your feet before you go into the mosque. The same thing, you would bow towards Mecca. But if you're in a virtual context, there is no water, there is no Mecca. Now, if you think about it, these are crucial elements to practice the religion, and which are part of the architecture and part of the building and part of the ritual of how you approach the building and how you experience the building. Now, in a virtual context, you don't want to just replicate that, and you want to generate its own quality that matches this one. And that is something very difficult and very hard. we tried that here with some experiments in this context, but it is a personal interpretation of how that could be solved. And that is actually the interesting part in what we do in a virtual context. Because it's unmediated, it becomes our own experience, and we can define of what is the value, what is the quality, and what is the heritage, and can in that way share it with other people and be able to communicate our ideas. Now, the work which we do, obviously, is a whole team behind it, and lots of students, lots of colleagues, lots of institutions, and we are very lucky to be able to work with the Futuna Trust on this project, which we go now more into detail. What you will see now is an attempt of bringing the chapel into a different realm. It's not an attempt to make a copy or to make a forensic display of what we have, what we can experience here. It's an attempt to translate the quality into a different medium and have a different experience in this context. Michael will now talk to us virtually for a couple of minutes about how he generated a virtual model of the chapel, and then we go on with Katie. Thank you.
Kia ora, everyone. Sorry I couldn't be with you there today. My name is Michael. I'm a thesis student at Victoria University of Wellington. I'm currently finishing my Masters of Architecture. And today I'm here to talk to you a bit about the process that was used to make the 3D model in Virtual Futuna, which is photogrammetry. Now, put simply, photogrammetry is the process of taking multiple photographs of an object from multiple different positions and stitching them together to make a 3D model. Now, photogrammetry, the process, isn't actually all that new. It began its life as a form of aerial mapping back in World War I, actually. Here we can see a bloke hanging out the side of a plane taking photos. Now, what we can see here is that the big difference is that they were stitching their images together on a 2D surface. Today, with our current technology and computers, we are actually able to stitch our photographs together in a 3D plane. Now, one of the most common places that you will see photogrammetry, and might not even know it, is in your digital maps, such as Apple Maps, Google Earth. Here we can see a 3D model of Te Papa, a beautiful waterfront. Here's one of the War Memorial on the nice day, beautiful Wellington Day. Now, I'm going to start by emphasizing why we're so interested in photogrammetry, this method of 3D modeling. There are some methods of surveying and capturing spaces, but they will require a lot of expensive industrial level equipment and a lot of time. Now, what's exciting to us about photogrammetry is that this technology is becoming more and more accessible and easier to use, and it's quite quick. It's becoming more and more accessible even recently with Apple putting LiDAR technology into their iPads. You can see someone walking around scanning their living room just with their phone. With this technology becoming more and more accessible, it means that more and more people will be able to get out there and capture an accurate 3D timestamp of their beloved architectural heritage sites, like Futuna. Through the internet, this heritage can be shared around the world. I'm able to now explore the inside of a European palace from my couch at home. And now your friends and family overseas can explore Futuna on the inside and appreciate it, even with all of our border troubles. Let's have a look at how I was actually able to do this and capture the inside of Futuna to a high degree of accuracy with only a DSLR camera, a $40 software license, and a good day. This clip that I'm about to show you from Nat and Friends gives a good insight into how photogrammetry is captured for Google Earth.
North. turn south. It's sort of like mowing the lawn.
This pattern helps the photos overlap, and multiple cameras help capture a place from different angles.
In planes, we have 5 different cameras, one looking down and forward, back, left, and right.
In my mind, I'm picturing like photograph, 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 photograph,
Yep.
and then something puts them all together. Something called an algorithm.
Photogrammetry, yeah.
Which is just a fancy word for taking all of this imagery that we collect from the plane and constructing a 3D model.
The first step to creating a place in 3D is a little bit of photo editing.
So all the imagery is sort of prepped. That would be removing clouds, removing haze.
Oh, I cut off there a bit. But what they're doing is very similar to what I did and what most people do with photogrammetry. That includes setting out a designated path to make sure that you get plenty of coverage and overlap in your photographs, because remember, you need these photographs to overlap when you're stitching them together. Another thing that they alluded to was a bit of photo editing. Now, if there is any errors in your photos or any breaks, you want to try and minimize that as much as possible, which you can do in post-processing through photo editing, like in Photoshop. Like anything, there are a few tricks of the trade. The biggest is trying to imagine a photogrammetry model as one big image, stitched together with hundreds of other images. To make this one mega image look as clear as possible, you need to try and mitigate photography errors and differences in the image so that the mega image appears seamless when it's all connected together. The first way to do this is by capturing imagery on an overcast day. The time of day, in the time used to take photos, harsh shadows from a bright sun may have moved, meaning that the images won't line up properly when they're overlapped in 3D. Before capturing, it's important to make sure you plan out your capturing route so that the images have enough reference when they're overlapped. This means taking photos of the ground, of the midplane, and of the roof to make sure the entire interior is captured. If you want to push it further, you're able to edit the outputted 3D photogrammetry model to make it cleaner and more accurate. This involves cleaning up the mesh, making floors flat and walls flat where they might be a bit jagged. The final output of the photogrammetry process will give you 3 different models. The point cloud, which you see here, which are all of the unique points that the software was able to recognize in the images in stitching them together. The second is the mesh model, which is essentially kind of like a 3D connect the dots, where the 3D model has connected together all of those points to create a solid digital model. And the final one is the textured photogrammetry model, which uses the data from the photos that were taken and projects them onto the mesh in some complex origami-like way. Now that we have a nice clean model, not only are we able to share this digital heritage online, like I said before, but we're able to use it for research purposes. We're able to push our experience from the real world into the digital world through virtual reality, placing ourselves inside of this photogrammetry model that we've made. It's an interesting little bit of meta. As Byron will soon show us, virtual reality gives us a layer of engagement with heritage, a new layer allowing us to push how we experience our spaces and heritage.
Hi, I'm Katie Scheid, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the living heritage concept that I developed while I was a student at Victoria University. I did my master's in user experience design, and user experience design is kind of best described as the process of trying to design things for people by trying to put yourself in their shoes and see things from their perspective, and then make things for them that are actually useful and valuable to them. My background before that was as an artist in visual effects for film and TV, and I've always been really excited about emerging technologies and their ability to make like the invisible visible and to sort of push the boundary of what you can see in our world. I've recently been getting really excited about extended reality and just its ability to extend the human experience, and it can literally transcend our usual boundaries of time and space. I've also always been a fan of architecture, and when I was doing my capstone project for my master's, I wanted to do something about extended reality and architecture. So I was really excited to be introduced to Marc Aurel, and he challenged me to design an innovative heritage experience for the photogrammetry model that Michael has designed of Futuna Chapel. I'd never actually heard of Futuna before, despite having lived in Wellington for years and being a fan of architecture. So I started off by reading a few books about it. There's Voices of Silence by Russell Walden and Futuna, Life of a Building by Nick Bevan and Gregory O'Brien. And it was amazing how they really brought the building to life for me. And there were so many stories, and I realized how many people have been involved in Futuna's stories, and that it actually has people who care about it. I wanted to find out more about what the experience is of visiting Futuna. So I did a little research project where I brought people who, like myself, had grown up overseas and who had also never heard of Futuna before. And I brought them up sort of one at a time and let them wander around the chapel. And I told them a few stories that I had learned from reading the books and talking to Nick. And then I sat down with them and I asked them about what their experience had been like, what they found engaging, and what they'd like to do here and what they wanted to know. And I also got a chance to talk to them about their memories of visiting heritage sites around the world, because I really wanted to know what brought buildings to life for them when they visited them and what they really remembered. And through this research, I realized something, that a heritage site comes to life for people when they learn its stories through human stories. While I was here doing the research, I was really amazed by how many people dropped by. There were former retreatants who brought their families to visit Futuna. There was an architect who'd been inspired by Futuna who wanted to bring one of his clients to show the source of his inspiration. And there were also just people who'd heard about Futuna and wanted to drop by. And as I leafed through the guest book, I realized that beyond these people who've been a big part of Futuna's story, there are just hundreds of stories out there of people who feel these deep connections to Futuna, and that even though Futuna sits here empty most days, that it does have this huge extended family. I next wanted to find out more about sort of the essence of what a virtual experience is. So I found some participants and I asked them to visit a virtual experience of a photogrammetry model of a building on the other side of the world that they'd never heard of before. I let them sort of go in and then talk to them about what their experience had been. They talked about how exciting it was to be able to see a place that they probably never would have visited in real life, and that they sort of had this private view of a place that was just for them. Then I asked them to talk about what they imagine it would have been like if they had been there in person. And people said things like, oh, maybe you would have smelled coffee, or you would have felt the sun on your back, or you would have watched light moving across the wall, or you maybe would have met somebody and made a chance friendship. And I started thinking about what of these elements of the real world you could actually bring into a virtual experience. Like the coffee and the warmth is a bit tricky, but maybe you could meet somebody, and maybe you could watch the light move across the wall. Next, I wanted to think about how we could build something that would still be valuable in, say, 30 years' time. A big problem with digital technology is that it becomes obsolete so quickly, and I wouldn't want to build something that is obsolete next year. So I did a future design workshop where I asked a bunch of first-year design students to pretend they were living in the year 2050. And I wanted them to try to think of what we could build now that would still be really relevant and valuable to them in, say, 30 years' time. There were a couple of things they came up with. The first one was that they imagined that a virtual Futuna would be part of a bigger network of virtual sites, which, if you think about Google Maps and yesterday's announcement from Facebook, isn't really that hard to imagine. But then the other thing they came up with is that it would be really valuable in the future if we started recording stories from now and keep growing more and more stories and build sort of a time capsule, an archive of stories that could be visited in any virtual experience, no matter how it evolves in the future. One great thing about studying at Victoria was getting to talk to lots of academics there and get their insights and try to think from different perspectives about the project. Of course, I spoke to Marc Aurel a lot, and he sort of challenged me to think of virtual heritage as sort of the opposite of a museum experience, where in a museum experience, they collect things that are valuable and then interpret them for people and then kind of try to explain why they're valuable and important. Where in a virtual heritage experience, you can look around and find things that are actually meaningful to you personally, so that no matter who you are and what your background is, or what year it is, you can find things that actually relate directly to you. And that's also, instead of only a few people being able to visit a museum, this is something that could be experienced by many people, and the access could be much, much wider. We had a great talk with Dr. Gina Grimshaw, who's the deputy head of the School of Psychology, and she's doing work around using VR to kind of, bring on emotional responses. And she uses VR as a tool in studies of psychology. And she's found that whether in the real world or in a VR headset, people report that when they look up, they have a feeling that is referred to as, well, what we call awe. And it's sort of hard to explain, but it's like sort of the feeling in your chest and the back of your throat. And you might get it when you, say, look up at a night sky or at some trees or at the roof of a chapel. And I started thinking about how an immersive experience that makes you feel like you're really standing right there can actually bring on an emotional response, so that you're not just looking with your eyes, you can actually feel things that the real space would make you feel. It was really important to me to try to think of how the design could be successful from a Te Ao Maori perspective as well. So I talked to Maori academics who gave me some really amazing insights. Kevin Shedlock, who's assistant lecturer at the School of Engineering and Computer Science, challenged me to think of Futuna as more than just the building of Futuna, but all the parts that it's made up of, and think of what their stories are. Like if you were to look at a pew and it's made of wood, try to think of what tree that might have come from and what that tree's story is, and then what land it grew on and whose stories are on that land. And by doing that, it suddenly becomes much wider, and you realize that so many people's stories connect back to Futuna. Dr. Rebecca Kittle was senior lecturer at the School of Architecture, and she challenged me to look further beyond Futuna's foundations, down to the ground that it's sitting on, and find all the stories that were here before Futuna was, and think about how they could also be part of a virtual experience, so that it's not just a built environment, it's actually just place. And through these talks, I started thinking about how a virtual heritage experience is an opportunity for people to experience themselves in a context where they can be connected to the natural world and to other humans. I've been very lucky to have the help and guidance of the family of John Scott in my research, and went up to Hawke's Bay and had a great talk with Emma, Jacob, and Hannah Scott. And they had suggestions about how, like what Marc Aurel was talking about with ritual around in virtual spaces, how you could design a respectful approach to Futuna. And they suggested that you could maybe put on the headset, and that the darkness that you come out of when you put on the headset could be like the story of creation, and that you could find yourself on the grass outside of Futuna. Like in many virtual experiences, you might find yourself in the building or outside, but if you started a bit further away, you could actually figure out where you are, and then move towards the building, giving you time to build an impression of what it is and where you are. And then maybe there could be a challenge of who you are and what you're interested in, and which gives you a chance for self-reflection before being invited in to meet its people. Which brings me to the virtual Futuna experience as it is now. It'll be something like you can, whether you're sitting in London or at a school in New Zealand, you can put on the headset and find yourself outside of Futuna, and you might hear Tui singing and be able to look around. And then you walk towards the chapel, and maybe you have to choose your avatar. Maybe you can pick how you want to appear. Are you particles of light? Are you, this is all still things I'm excited about developing. But it could also mean what language would you like to hear stories in, or from what time. the stories are a huge part of what I see as the heart of a virtual Futuna. And I'd want to start by interviewing people who have these long connections to Futuna, and then maybe setting up a kiosk in Futuna, inviting people along to tell their stories. And then next, an app where people could upload their stories from wherever they are in the world. And these could all become part of a growing database. The thing that's really important to me about this, though, is I want to be sure that people know where their stories live and who they belong to, so that data sovereignty is a huge part of anything that gets built. I pitched the concept to the Ministry for Culture and Heritage, who are supporting it with seed funding. I'm putting together a team at the moment, and we're designing a technical pipeline to bring it all to life. We sort of see Digital Futuna as a pilot project that could be replicated in different places and different sites. And I'm looking forward to creating partnerships that can make this all possible as well. And as I've been working on all of the project, it's made me realize that I've always wondered, when I've lived in different places, about who's lived there before me and what stories have been there, and often wished that the walls could talk. And which reminded me of this short from a film by Sam Neill from 1975. He made a film called 4 Shorts on Architecture. And there's a bit of Futuna. And it'll actually let you see who was sitting where you are, or standing, in 1975, and what sounds would have been in this very space then. So, I'll play this for you and enjoy.
I think it was a very successful building. It's become a symbol of something for its time. It's well executed. It retains the sort of mystical feelings which one would expect of a building produced for the Roman Catholic Church. It's taken on an ageless quality, which I think is a point of a good building.
To my mind, the Futuna Chapel is one of the great small buildings in the world.
Yes, that's fine, but it's what's inside that really counts. It's the people and what they're doing. That's the essence of Futuna.
Oops. Sorry.
Thank you, Katie. Let me just... Is that me? Sweet. Kia ora everyone. I am Byron Mallett. I am a lecturer at the School of Design Innovation at Victoria University. And I'm coming in at the end of this talk with also, I guess we've been talking a lot about virtual reality and sort of presenting Futuna Chapel in such a way. My sort of particular part of this project was actually putting this particular chapel into virtual reality. And so this part's going to be a little bit different, where I actually have a little live demonstration that we can show. So this is actually getting a little bit meta at this point. We're going to show you a virtual copy of Futuna Chapel whilst inhabiting the chapel. I've got some stories to tell about that in a second, because that will be some things that happened today that were actually really quite interesting for that. Now let's we do a little bit of technical switching just now. Okay. And it's all right, it's the magic of technology. And, there we go there. Don't worry, you will see it in a second. It will not just be me standing up here waving my arms around. That is a very real problem with usually presenting content from virtual reality in the real world is how do you let people know what is actually happening. So I'm just getting that up and running. Q3YP33. Is that okay? Can you see that? Yeah. Cool. Marc Aurel, can you come and join me up here? I was having a little bit of a think about this earlier, and I realized that it would be a little bit weird if, say, I was going to talk to you from inside of virtual reality, and then I can't see anybody, which is a little bit strange. So Marc is going to help demonstrate this for us now. Okay, so yeah, just have a nice little slow look around there. So, welcome to the Futuna Chapel, inside the Futuna Chapel. So basically what we have here is Michael's photogrammetry model, but now finally presented in, well, I guess like one of the interpretations that we can actually sort of inhabit the space in a digital sense. Now, sort of going back a little bit in terms of, just give a little bit of brief context in terms of where we're at now with virtual reality as a technology. It's like quite topical based on, I guess, the big Facebook Meta thing yesterday as well. So, virtual reality as a technology has been around for quite a few decades, if anything since around about the 80s or so. And only in the last, I would say, 7 to 8 years has it really taken off as not just its own industry, but as an actual technology that finally passed a threshold with which, when you are viewing worlds or content through this technology, we passed a threshold where the human brain actually starts to take over, which is great. In terms of the content in the world that we consume with our eyes and our senses, we amalgamate all these senses together, and that allows us to basically observe and understand the world around us. So, I think you're wandering out a little bit there, Marc. So, new virtual reality technology started to pass that threshold where rather than us, say, looking at a screen, say, for example, at the moment you're looking at TV screens and are having to interpret what the screen is showing you as maybe being something that is some degree of real, but you have to use a lot of imagination in order to understand that. But as soon as you put on one of these headsets, you start actually understanding your position in relation to that content. So as Katie said a little bit earlier in regards to awe, the act of being able to look up and understanding how amazing things are which are actually presented at scale. Unlike any other technology earlier, VR actually really allows us to actually feel a sense of awe because we can understand this content and its scale in relation to the one form of scale that we always have access to as a reference point, and that is yourself. How large is an object in relation to you, and how small or how large are you in relation to it? So this is sort of really, I guess, a great way for being able to actually consume the content rather than necessarily, yeah, actually Marc is demonstrating a really good thing right here. In virtual reality, there is no mouse or keyboard or controller. Your body is the method with which you interact with this content, which means if you crouch down or get on your hands and knees or look underneath something or, careful, there isn't a seat behind you, don't sit down, your brain really starts taking over and going, wait, hang on, this is actually real in some capacity. As well here, like Marc, if you stick your hands out in front of you, you can see that he also has a sense of body presence, which is a representation of his hands. So we're starting to move away from this idea of controllers, and we can actually now have sort of I know he's in a bit of a robot mannequin right now, it's just a placeholder. So yeah, this is one method with which we've been experimenting with how to consume the content, how to consume the model, and being able to explore it. And I have a little story to tell about that, which is, this is actually my first day inside this chapel. Yet I have been inhabiting a virtual reality copy of the, well, not copy, sorry, a virtual reality oh, well done there. Actually, that is a great segue into the next bit of content, actually. You found the one. Bye, Marc. Okay, I'll just put you out of that for a second there.
Jumped off the world.
Yeah. Great, it's like reveal the one place where you can do that. So, this is my first actually time within this chapel, but I have actually been within a representation of the chapel in order to actually build this content. And it was amazing coming here and having the ability to realize that I feel like I've been here before, that I've had memories of being in a location. However, now they are actually even more richer and more nuanced because I'm able to enjoy the way the light is coming through the windows. The acoustics in this place are amazing. I can now actually really start to appreciate those as well. However, I was able to, say, walk around and know all the nooks and crannies of this location because I've already actually been there, and my brain has formed memories to say, yeah, this is a place you've been before. I was able to come around the corner, and it's a small detail, but I knew exactly where the fire hose was in the corner because I'd seen it within the space that I'd been designing. So that's one way of consuming the content. Another way that we have here as well, I have open here in just a web browser. This was a version of the chapel that we demonstrated at the Ars Electronica Festival that we held online sort of virtually, I think about a month ago now, I think it was in October. And this is also a VR version as well, but I'm just sort of driving it around on the screen at the moment. And that introduces another important thing, which is virtual reality content still needs to be distributed or actually provided to people in a way that they can discover these locations and they can be shared not just with people where they can consume them individually, but also in sort of a collaborative or community sense as well. So, for example, this little room that I'm in here right now is a complete multi-person location. So we actually had multiple people who would come into this one location that I'm in right now, and you could, in VR, so just a slightly different version of VR that we're presenting with this one, and they were able to, actually I met up with Marc Aurel here, for example. We both, he was on his computer, I was in VR, and we were able to sit and hold a conversation as if we were in a version of the chapel, which was great because it actually just sort of incited this interest in me that I have to see this place one day. So this could be provided to somebody across the world who sees this chapel and sees this place that they can still consume and enjoy in some way, but the limitations of technology right now do not mean that it is a replacement for the location itself. It is really one set of sensors, in this case, sight and maybe a little bit of sound, but being here, I feel like, as Katie said, I'm able to sort of feel heat and warmth. I'm able to hear the sound of the acoustics of this location. And when I actually tested out the VR thing here today, it felt even a little bit more real than it was when I was testing in my bedroom, because I could hear what it felt to inhabit this space. So, it's been a really sort of fun, quite sort of journey to be able to try to represent something real within a virtual space rather than going down the rabbit hole of saying, oh, we have virtual reality, we can do anything with this space. And I think grounding virtual reality in real places and real experiences gives us a really great connection to understanding those places and also helps to introduce us to find new experiences, new locations. So, I do have, for anybody who, afterwards, I have about 3 headsets or so, so if you want to stick around after the presentation and have an explore of the virtual version of the chapel, whilst standing in the real version of the chapel, then please come on up and give it a go afterwards. So this has been a really fun experience, and as I said, even today, I feel like my understanding of this place has sort of evolved even further based on sort of wonderful talks by Marc Aurel, Michael and Katie, but also from sort of experiencing this place itself with a interesting merging of technology and the real. Anyway, so I think that's about me, so I think, Mark, if we finish up.
Go into the sphere.
Oh, you want to go into the, oh yeah, okay. So yes, so actually, thank you for the sort of reminder. We also have within this little space as well. If I could just zoom in a little bit further. Oh, there we go. Yep. We actually have like some real-world sort of photography, 360 photography that was actually captured from the space. So we can still reinforce, say, our virtual location with sort of more accurate sort of real-world data as well. So in this case, there we go. So it's a little photogrammetry. Oh, not photogrammetry. 360 capture of the space. I think that's just in the corner of there. Yeah. Anyway. Cool. All right. So, yep. And I think I'll just. All right. I will take that. There we go.
Good. Thank you. That brings us to the end of the talk. Thanks for coming. Thank you for listening. We're very happy to take any comments or questions from you if you have. Byron will now make the headsets ready. So anybody want to go? We have 3 of them. We have plenty of time, so everybody can give it a go. As you saw, it's very easy. Just put it on and have a look and experience it. It's the interesting part for me was that the juxtaposition of the virtual model in the real. So you have that interesting blending between being in the real space as well as being at the same time in the virtual model. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mark, is that on? One of the questions I have, and it might just pay to talk about a little bit, the model that's been demonstrated, people may have noticed that the pews were starting to fall apart a wee bit, and some of the structure of the building wasn't as intact as we would have thought. And it's not really looking into the future, because I don't think the chapel will ever get to that stage. But I understand it's a limitation of the prototype that you're working on. But maybe you could just talk about that a little bit so people understand that what they're looking at in terms of the model is
right. Yes. So
why it's looking that way.
Yeah, I don't have now a photo, but you saw that earlier, that the photogrammetry, and especially when you came to the seatings and so on, looked a little bit melted like ice cream cheese kind of thing, baked cheese. Photogrammetry is not a technology which gives you an accurate one-to-one representation. So what you see is what you get. There is a translation process, and there is an error process. Now, the technology which we used, being just a smartphone or a tablet, is the quality or the high fidelity is a lower one than if you would now use absolutely precise instrument. You can do that, then you get a higher quality, but you pay a premium for it, obviously. But our intention was really that the model is an interpretation of reality. It's not reality. And by this interpretation, and the more errors you have, and that's maybe my personal take to it, you realize it is not the real thing, and it allows you to offer your own interpretation of what the model is or what it could be. And I want to also make very clear that a digital heritage is not the physical heritage. And we want to be something different in this context. And there is still a lot of reality and realism in there. One can now push that with the technology and make it all fly and all become super virtual. But this is where we have a discussion in the digital heritage discourse. How far is it a medium to capture reality and archive reality, and how far is it its own medium to become its own in its own existence? And you have this on both ends, and I don't know, probably both are right. That is with everything. I hope that answers a bit the question, but if you go in there, you will see that, and you will, I think after a little while, you won't feel disturbed by it. You feel actually the quality and the beauty in it, and you realize that you're in a model.
Well, absolutely fascinating for us as a trust to contemplate how we may preserve this building beyond its physical life, which I think we all say this building's here forever, but no one can tell me how long forever is, because I think it might be a bit more finite than we think. So I think it's fascinating. I thank you to you and to Michael and Katie and Byron for putting that together. And I know that the trust is, this started in December of last year, this project. It's been quite rapid, really. And now that Katie's got some seed funding to develop a proposal, the wheels are starting to turn. So we are really looking forward to the outcome. We wouldn't be here today for this presentation if it wasn't for the generosity of LT McGuinness, a construction company here in Wellington, who have actually worked on a lot of heritage buildings, including the old old government house over in Mount Victoria and probably more recently St Mary's of the Angels. So they've actually funded this weekend as part of our contribution to Wellington Heritage. So I just wanted to acknowledge them. I want to thank you for coming, and for those of you online, thanks for watching. This talk will be archived, so it will be available to review at a later date on our website. So thank you everyone, and for those of you who want to have a virtual experience of Futuna while being in Futuna, this is a one-time opportunity. So Byron and Mark and Katie will advise you onto that as to how to go about that. So please, the headsets are waiting. Thank you.